Welcome back to our discussion, From Disruption to Cohesion, the next step in digital transformation, sponsored by Juniper Networks here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. My guest is Dave Mihelsic, Head of Federal Strategy and Technology at Juniper Networks. And Dave, let's go on with this idea of digital transformation and maybe talk about some of the technologies that are required there. And let's start with one that I think is probably close to Juniper, and that is software-defined networking. I think that's a concept that's understood but not that widely adopted yet in the federal government.
Well, I'm not sure it's even understood, and I'm not talking about that's not a criticism of the federal government. I think there's a large misperception on what SDN is and how it's going to fundamentally change the way we do business. So software-defined networking is really the concept of being able to separate networks functions from specific hardwares. And what we can do as we move to a more software-defined world is we can take network functions and virtualize them and move them to the place in the network where they're most appropriate, whether they be a commercial cloud or an end-user system in general. And I think moving forward, we're going to see software-defined networking coupled with automation dramatically decrease the time that it takes to deploy services, as well as decrease the time that it takes to manage and maintain those services and increase the reliability of those services.
Because you have virtualization of applications and their data so that they can be put in the cloud.
Right. And virtualization of the network functionality, whether it be cybersecurity in terms of a firewall, you can take that firewall, virtualize it, and push it into the cloud close to the data. Or of a router itself, you can take that functionality that used to be accomplished by a custom piece of hardware and turn that into a modular software, and that modular software can be pushed into the cloud or into an end-user computing instance.
And not to get too confusing here, but can you take all of the services that are offered by those bundles of software, containerize the subroutines, and then maybe reuse them, rejuggle them, make them more portable even so?
Absolutely. So, my company, Juniper, is delivering firewalls as either virtualized instances that can be run in Amazon, or they're delivering them in containers that can be run in environments such as Docker or Kubernetes, so that you can have a standard development philosophy and use containers to maximize software use and have this capability available.
And so how does that add up to a better ability to have a digital transformation of your agency?
So where it adds up is you're able to deliver services much more quickly, much more reliably in a repeatable fashion. And once again, that coupled with automation, taking things that humans used to do by hand and initially just automating those into, essentially making scripts to do these rote steps over and over again, to moving to orchestrations where large, complex series of events are knitted together by a piece of network intelligence, to really machine-driven automation where, based on previous experiences, the network learns what it needs to do and then can improve how it operates moving forward.
And earlier we were talking about agile development as a methodology to get digital services deployed one by one and to make sure they're tested and vetted. It seems like if there is a problem in the development, or you come to a roadblock or a decision point in the development of a digital service under the agile method, it could be that a container or a bundle of containers is where you need to reprogram or update without affecting everything else. So does the containerization help the agile development process by isolating what it is you need to change as you get to what your goal is for your users?
Right, absolutely. You limit your complexity and you make it easier to walk backwards if you have a problem, to roll back to an earlier version of functionality and then be able to quickly determine what it was that caused that problem, fix that, and then roll forward again.
And you mentioned automation and orchestration, and that sounds like compiling, but it's really not. So,
well, it is part of the development process. So, leading edge companies, I mentioned some up front. Netflix and Spotify and Uber are using these methodologies to automate testing during the development process, and then based on that automated testing, to deploy code in a continuous fashion to the network. So, some of these companies are delivering enhancements to their products not every week or every day, but multiple times a day. Sometimes as quickly as every hour, they're delivering new capability, and those are automatically compiled, tested, and deployed into the network.
Now, in all of these situations, digital services, cloud deployment, whether it's a public-facing application or an agency-facing application, everybody is worried about cybersecurity. And to many federal practitioners, to them, they say that the cloud still seems like too much of a black box, even though it might be a FedRAMP compliant cloud or a higher level security compliant cloud. It's the visibility, not so much that bothers them, even in the face of good, attestation by the cloud provider that it's secure, and it might even be more secure than your own data center. But what you said earlier about moving firewalls as virtual software-defined objects into the cloud, that would seem like a good strategy for alleviating the problem of the cloud being a black box for cyber monitoring.
So absolutely. And I think federal organizations really just need to get over this notion that the cloud is less secure than the computer under the desk. The reality is that these major cloud providers have made huge investments in being able to provide multi-tenant security for these clouds. Now, it's incumbent upon the service owner to ensure that they do their piece of the puzzle, which is providing those cybersecurity services to now secure their workload that's deployed into that commercial cloud. And virtualized firewalls and other virtualized security mechanisms are a big step forward.
And all of these things help agencies get out from under the cost of maintaining their own physical hard infrastructure. And so let me give you an example. It seems like 1,000 years ago, but remember the Cash for Clunkers program was launched, and briefly it was very popular, and so it crashed under the workloads. And the federal government at that time wasn't all that agile in terms of being able to expand, or scalable, let's say, to scale quickly. With orchestration and cloud, it seems like that issue, if that digital service becomes really popular, you could scale a lot faster without the service disruptions that happened in some of the other programs.
So absolutely. So federal organizations need to understand as they build their next generation applications, they need to build them to take advantage of this scale out style of computing, which many commercial organizations have been doing for 10 years at this point. So they need to be able to essentially request computing on demand, load copies of the service into that computing. If they need to continuously monitor performance, if the performance isn't sufficient, request additional capacity. That may come, a cloud provider may have an API so they can essentially just turn up the number of compute cycles associated with their already existing instances, or they may request additional instances and load software into those and load balance into them.
But in watching all of this, just like in watching cybersecurity, isn't the aim to even orchestrate those steps you just described? So that if you know what the capacity is of this instance, and you can program it to simply add more on its own rather than having someone watch a pane of glass and saying, uh-oh, we've got a capacity issue
So
here.
absolutely, no human can keep up with the scale and the speed required to do this. So it has to be automated. Those automations may be built directly into the cloud provider where they have an auto scale capability to just increase the number of cycles when they determine that your application isn't being performant, or it may be incumbent upon the federal organization to have telemetry coming back from the application, and then once again to request more capacity for the cloud provider, load in the software required, and then load balance into that new instance. And it can't be done with human intervention. It's got to be automated.
So for your digital transformation project, then the idea of a dashboard, just like we have those for other metrics like cybersecurity on the network, is something you really should think about from the outset.
Right. So there are still going to be operators involved. Those operators do need a dashboard so they can understand what's going on, and in particular, take actions when something completely unanticipated has happened, where the automation doesn't know what to do. But for the most part, you need to design applications and automations that are auto-correcting.
All right, we're going to take a break on that note. My guest today is Dave Mihelsic. He is head of federal strategy and technology at Juniper Networks. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This discussion is From Disruption to Cohesion, the next step in digital transformation, sponsored by Juniper, here on federalnewsradio.com and Federal News Radio 1500 AM.